Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and welcome to First Draft, where I speak with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. So Democrats have been feeling bullish about flipping the House and even the Senate in November. But last night was a surprising night for a lot of folks who assumed that progressivism was ascendant in the Democratic Party. Progressives did suffer a big setback with Cori Bush losing in Missouri, and Abdul El-Sayed clung to a very narrow victory in Michigan, surprising a lot of people. So joining us today is Amy Parnes, who is a political journalist and a #1 New York bestselling author. She currently is the senior correspondent for The Hill in Washington. She covers Democrats religiously, and I can't really think of a better person to talk to on a morning as interesting as this one. So Amy, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
Great. Well, I will let everyone know you've heard this, but I'm coming to you from Lansing, Michigan, and on very little sleep because we had a very interesting primary night. Amy, what kind of results were you expecting in the Michigan Senate Democratic primary, which was only called, moments ago by the Associated Press for Abdul El-Sayed?
Yeah, I mean, you look at those results, Susan, and it's pretty much exactly what we were expecting, or at least what I was expecting and some of my colleagues, because this race was so close. I know that the candidates were saying that in the final days, but it really was. And it was really kind of a bellwether of, what is happening in your state right now and what is going on, how we can look at this and what we can glean from these results as we pivot forward to not only the midterms, but to 2028, which is something that I'm covering religiously. And really fascinating because for so long, for months and months, and especially more recently, you had progressives, Democratic Socialists basically saying, we are where the energy is in the party, that we are the party now. And I think last night proved that it's really, while there might be some strength there on the left, there clearly is, a movement too for moderates. And I think that moderates will continue to push and make the case. There is really no clarity that this moment offers other than it's going to get uglier and uglier as both sides try to make their case for why they should be in power.
So there were so many polls out in this race that were put out by El-Sayed's campaign or sympathetic organizations that showed this was going to be a blowout, like almost 20 points. And that was kind of the vibe if you were on Blue Sky. So, for those folks who were not watching the data or things on the ground, how do you think they're processing all this, and what does that mean for November?
I think it means that things are going to continue to, there's no like answer here, if you will. I think a lot of people were looking to a lot of progressives and maybe Democratic Socialists. I know he wasn't really a Democratic Socialist per se, but I think that they will continue to make the case. I think if he would have won by a larger margin, they would have said, look, they would have made this sort of the case study of where the party is. I don't think they can make that case study anymore. I think that, moderates are still going to be hammering this message that you can't win nationally if you're not appealing to people beyond your base. And I think that's sort of one of the biggest takeaways here, that I think they can continue to make that argument based on last night's results, based on what we know now, that, Michigan is still going to be, while it voted for Trump twice, I think that, there are still a lot of people that will say you have to speak to a larger case, you have to speak to a larger electorate. You can't just talk about Gaza all the time and expect to win.
So I know that you most recently wrote a piece that said that Democrats are bullish on winning both chambers, but they're worried that they'll trip over their own feet. Is that what might be going on here? Is there a possibility that this open Senate seat could flip to Republicans in Michigan in November?
I think there is a great fear, and I think that's what you're going to continue to hear. Of course, moderates were making the case that you can't vote for El-Sayed because of that, because he's going to win big in November. I mean, lose big in November, rather. And I think that they will continue to make that case. The big question is, can the party come together? We heard from Stevens that she will, urge her supporters to back El-Sayed, obviously. But, do they? And there has been so much circular firing squad, for lack of a better term, to quote the former president Barack Obama. There's been so much of that. I think tensions are so high right now. Can you convince a lot of the people who supported her to back him? And now I think Republicans are going to continue to prosecute this. And you've already heard from Speaker Johnson saying mini Mamdanis around the country. They're going to be making this case, I think, going forward, that voting for El-Sayed would be like voting for a Mamdani, would be voting for a democratic socialist. And what does this mean? And I'm curious to see how that argument plays out in November.
So on the Republican side, Mike Rogers, former congressman, FBI agent, former head of the House Intelligence Committee, he ran unopposed, and he's been running ads here for months where he does not say that he's a Republican. He's, clearly just trying to up his profile as an independent, maybe moderate choice out there, despite the fact that he's been endorsed by Donald Trump. And he did run for U.S. Senate for another open Senate seat a couple years ago. So he is definitely a strong candidate, I would say, for Republicans. Probably if you had to pick one in a year like this, he'd be a good choice. But really, is it just a matter of fundamentals, where the environment for Democrats is so good that even though Abdul El-Sayed may not be the strongest general election candidate, he can still win?
That's the big question, I think, right now, Susan. And I think it's smart, I think, that Mike Rogers is, playing down his Republican roots, because I think right now, especially, he lost by a very small margin in the last race. And I think he's sort of banking on that, that people know him. Here's this, but it is a time of newcomers, to your point. It's a time of outsiders. I think El-Sayed is kind of banking on that and trying to galvanize people in that way, that people are fed up with the establishment, they're fed up with the status quo, and that's why you should elect him. And that will be really interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. Do you want someone who is an outsider, who hasn't really been around the block, or do you want someone who has been there and barely lost? If it all comes down to whether people want that, if they have that desire to kind of turn the page, or if they want someone who is an establishment figure. And I think there are going to be a lot of lessons learned. I can make that prediction already, based on the results in November. I think that we're gonna be able to learn a lot. And I think the 2028 candidates right now are paying attention to this race closely to see where exactly the electorate is.
El-Sayed made a powerful case that he was running against corporate money, especially AIPAC money. That was definitely an appealing message for people. But what kind of environment will he be facing in the general? Because AIPAC probably isn't going to go anywhere. I mean, they are just fine with Mike Rogers and could spend heavily. Mike Rogers is a great fundraiser. He has Trump's endorsement. So he's going to still have to be fighting perhaps an uphill battle in the general when it comes to money. And how much of a factor do you think that might be?
I mean, he was up against it in the primary, obviously. I think he got something, a very small fraction. What was it, like $2 million Stevens got what, 60 or so roughly. And so I think, and he was making that case up until in the final days, saying, look, we were up against it and we still won. You know, he's banking on these small dollar donations. I think AIPAC, to your point, yes, it's going to play a major role in this race. And I think a lot of people are, you know, elections are about the future. They're about voting your pocketbook. And I think right now, especially with inflation and gas prices and all of that, it'll be interesting to see, do voters still want, you know, Trump? Do they, is this really in Michigan specifically a referendum against Trump? Is Rogers, how does Rogers act? What does he say about the president to convince voters that, you know, he isn't really aligned with him, with the president? And I think El-Sayed is going to make the case that, you know, you should look past that. You should, you know, he's going to continue to say, look, AIPAC and all the outside spending. I think that galvanizes his own base, obviously, and I think he's going to continue to say that. But I think he has to pivot in a way. This is different than a primary election. I think primaries are very different beasts, and so he's going to have to talk more about inflation and what Donald Trump has done to the economy in Michigan, a different kind of electorate. And so he's going to have to be a little more persuasive than a little less Gaza, I think a little more economy in
I know that there's been some discussion from national reporters like Dave Weigel about El-Sayed's decision the night before the primary. He went to this big influencer party, and there's an image from there that I'm wondering if this is going to become iconic in the general, because I expect that it's going to get very ugly. There are going to be very ugly ads being run both on socials and on TV. But, you know, you had on primary day, El-Sayed was already predicting like a 7-point victory in the general. He's already been talking about being a player in the 2028 presidential election. And then this primary was so close. I'm wondering if this picture is going to start to symbolize what the Republican Party wants to define him as. Is, yes, he's very charismatic. He can galvanize voters, but there's no there.
Yeah, I can definitely see this in an ad. And I think he's going to have to, that's the thing, is what I was just saying, is it's a different kind of election. He's really going to have to explain to voters for why they want him, why they want someone different than the establishment. You can say that maybe he didn't do such a good job you can make the case that maybe he didn't do such a good job doing that, because look at how close it was. I think this is going to be a moment of reflection, even if he did win. His team is going to have to get together and figure out what their message is going forward. He's going to obviously try to make the case that the establishment hasn't done anything. He's going to obviously make this about Donald Trump and tie Mike Rogers to Donald Trump. But I think, you know, he has to do more than that. It can't just be a referendum in a state like Michigan. You have to convince voters why you are more electable. And I think he has some challenges ahead.
So it's interesting. Michigan also has an open gubernatorial race. Jocelyn Benson, who's the current Secretary of State, just was on a glide path, got the nomination with like Soviet style numbers. She seems to be in very good shape for the general. Do you think that in the end she will be a help and get El-Sayed across the finish line?
I think they're going to have to. I think this is the big question right now. They have to stop. You know, it was such a contentious primary where they were really going after one another. And they're going to have to figure out a way to convince voters and make this more about a referendum against Trump. Donald Trump was kind of lost in all of this.
Yeah.
You didn't really hear so much about him. And that was a concern among a lot of Democrats that I've been speaking to, not just in Michigan, but around the country in other races, that you're not really hearing Donald Trump's name so much. And, you know, a race like 2018 was all about Donald Trump. Right. This one really wasn't. This one was really about, the Democratic Party is really in this intense battle, and I have been calling it a civil war for the last few cycles, and Democrats would scoff at me and be like, it's over exaggerated, it's not really there. You could always feel it, Susan, beneath the surface. It was always there. It was there in 2020. It was there in 2024, in these cycles, and it's now just everywhere. And I think that it's eating up headlines and the attention. People are curious about what is happening within the party. The party doesn't really have an identity yet. I think it's really relying on the fact that it's still like an anti-Trump moment, but they're still trying to figure out who exactly they are. And I don't think that this will resolve itself in November. I think that it will continue to play out in 2028. And that will be what's interesting for people like you and me.
Absolutely. I mean, you have the Dems in disarray beat, and they're giving you a lot of material.
Yes, they are. And, I always kind of laughed at people who told me that it really wasn't playing out, because I could see the embers of it happening. And now that it's like full force, that it's there playing out in front of us, it's fascinating to watch. And it's so much more explosive, I think, than people thought. And, the party is having trouble. You're seeing the trouble within the Democratic National Committee and the autopsy and lessons learned.
Right.
And so, it's going to play out in a number of ways in the coming months and years.
Yeah. Do you liken this to the Tea Party movement that roiled the Republican Party during the Obama era?
I think it's very similar, actually. I think people are fed up. It's different and similar. I think people are fed up by the establishment. It's fascinating to see. I think Mamdani was the first case of that, where, it was shocking to a lot of people that he was able to defeat someone like Andrew Cuomo with all his resources, with his big name. But I think, someone wrote me last night and said, it's interesting because these outsiders right now are kind of tapping into not only this desire for something new, but they're also these, they're not man-made. They're like these, they're very natural in what they do. They're well-spoken. Mamdani, has his own communications tactic. I think Meghan McCain recently said, we should be scared of people like him. And she said that he's happy that, he's not able to run for president, obviously, because he wasn't born here. But there are, people like him are tapping into this desire. They're communicating well to what people actually want. And I think it's scary to a lot of Republicans. I think that's why you're seeing Speaker Johnson talk about mini Mamdanis. I think they're talking about this because they know that A, it does scare some people, but B, that they're scared that they are kind of effective, and they're tapping into this moment. And I think it is very similar to what we saw, after President Obama was elected and the rise of the Tea Party.
So El-Sayed had some very big names come in from Bernie Sanders, AOC, Maxwell Frost. But I did think it was interesting that Mamdani didn't come in, because he is like the biggest name in the progressive movement. What do you make of that?
It's interesting. I think Mamdani is kind of picking his moments smartly in various ways. I think he didn't want to get involved. I think a lot of people are kind of very smartly watching this on the sidelines and not wanting to mix up, to get mixed up in it until it matters. I think, it's a page out of the Barack Obama playbook of just, watching and not taking a side. And I'm curious to see how Democrats do act, even the moderates. I think the big question today is, can they get on board? Can they support someone like an El-Sayed, and how do they help the party move forward from this moment, and can they? And there will be a lot of attention on this right now. I think both sides are really, really impassioned and inflamed on their respective sides. They are they really want, they really feel, especially moderates, they're in my ear are constantly making the case that Democrats can't win nationally. They can't win in 2028 with a progressive, with a democratic socialist. But can they? I think that's the big question. I think that we're still going to be looking at these races and trying to figure out where the party is, I think, for a while.
Absolutely. Well, I did want to ask you about Michigan's soon-to-be senior senator, Alyssa Slotkin, and the role she did not fill last night. Her endorsed candidate in a very key congressional seat, the one she used to occupy in mid-Michigan, which is now held by Republican Tom Barrett. Her favorite candidate lost in a three-way primary to a DSA member, Will Lawrence. A lot of people are really nervous about Democrats' chances of taking that seat now. And also, she sat out this Senate primary, unlike Governor Gretchen Whitmer and a lot of establishment Republicans, establishment Democrats. They went and endorsed Haley Stevens after Mallory McMorrow dropped out, and it was no longer a three-way battle. Is Alyssa Slotkin, who definitely has designs on 2028, is she a loser in all of this? Does this diminish her for what she wants to do on the national stage in 28?
I think she also is being very smart. If she wants to run, if she has bigger aspirations, she also doesn't want to get mixed in and muddled in, even if it is her old congressional seat. She knows that a state like Michigan, her own seat went Republican. I think she wanted to. I think when you have bigger aspirations, you want to kind of keep out of. You're looking at the big picture, and you want to kind of stay out of it. But I think, in her own right, I think because she didn't maybe get involved, I think there are a lot of people who might be throwing fingers at her and saying, pointing the finger at and saying that she is kind of responsible, and I'm curious to see how this plays out for her.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about Missouri, where Cori Bush was trying to mount a comeback against Wesley Bell, who had knocked her off a couple of years ago. And he ended up having a much bigger night, I think, than people expected, and much bigger than he did 2 years ago. How was he able to do that? What was the right message there?
I'm sorry, I'm having some technical.
Amy, are you able to hear us? Hi, Amy, are you able to hear us okay? I hope we can get Amy back, because there's so much more to talk about besides Michigan, and she's a great person for us to talk to. She was referencing that piece that she had written about the New York mayor, and I thought it was just fascinating that Meghan McCain kind of tipped Republicans' hands about how scared they are of his raw political talent. Obviously they don't agree with Mamdani on anything, but they recognize that he is someone who's inspiring people and making big changes, and could be a force to be reckoned with. So I would definitely encourage you to check out Amy's piece on that. She's also been writing extensively about what's been going on at the Democratic National Committee. None of it is good. We've got embattled Chair Ken Martin, who has been overseeing the party at a time when they're having trouble paying their bills, fundraising. Democratic candidates are doing fine. People seem to be giving to them, but nobody wants to invest in the DNC. And that could play a factor, especially if it comes down to a handful of seats for the House, and it definitely will for control of the Senate in the fall. So definitely, if you are able to read some of Amy's work, that's great. In the meantime, while we're trying to get her back, I know that we have a little footage of President Trump and his messaging that Democrats are trying to counter this election.
In the economy, Trump is at 42%. I shouldn't be for it. We have the greatest economy maybe in the history of the world for any country. We have $19.2 trillion being invested in the United States. And if I wouldn't have won, you would have had 10 trillion being taken out of the United States, and your welfare would have doubled and tripled, and we would have had a bankrupt.
Well, that's a target-rich environment for Democrats. So, regardless of how close the primary elections may have been last night, definitely Donald Trump is not giving Republicans much to work with. So that in and of itself is good news for Democrats. While we're trying to get Amy back, we also have some hot takes on what the Democratic primary electorate is looking like these days.
Can you spend $60 million and get whooped like this? Because the old model was you get the donors to get the consultants to buy a bunch of ads and you win. That's how you get attention. This movement says, I don't need donors, ads, I don't need consultants. I'm going right to the people with TikTok and grassroots, and they've disintermediated the entire donor class, disintermediated the entire consultant class, and this is a revolution. And so this is going to happen again and again. The Democratic Party is now Blockbuster. These kids are Netflix. We are selling CDs out the trunk. This is Napster becoming Spotify, and it's happening tonight.
I think Van Jones's references might be a little dated, but it's the metaphor still works. The last thing we have is if, and I'll leave you with this if Amy can't come back. Here's what El-Sayed said in his appeal last night as he's trying to bring the party together.
We live in an era of historical inequality, in an era where union participation is near an all-time low, but the number of billionaires has never been higher. An era where schools continue to carry the consequences of historical segregation. An era where we continue to see a few very small people try to define America as being as small as they are. We can't control the past 250 years. What we can do is build the next 250.
Well, thank you for everyone for joining us. I think we have Amy back now.
So sorry about that.
It happens. I get it, and it happens at the worst time. I wanted to ask you about what happened in Missouri, where Wesley Bell was able to hold off a primary challenge from former Congresswoman Cori Bush, and he put up some really impressive numbers, more than when he won his primary 2 years ago. Talk to us about what his message is and how he was able to win last night.
Well, he really tapped into a very pragmatic message. I think that was really key. I think he wasn't very ideological. I think he was able to, bring in a larger coalition. And I think that Bush, in a lot of ways, wasn't able to recreate that coalition that she had in 2020. I think outside money also played a large factor in Bell's win, really, really large. And so I think for all of those reasons, but I think, when you talk about pragmatism, and you look at a state like Texas and why Tallarico was able to win, also taking kind of a similar approach in a lot of ways, talking, not really taking on this ideological role. I think there is a lesson to be learned from that as well.
That's really interesting. And then I know that they had some big ballot initiatives in Missouri, and they were able to withstand Republican attempts to change the ballot process, because a lot of progressive measures have passed, even in ruby red Missouri, and some reforms to electing the Supreme Court. What does that say for the fact that even in a red state, there still seems to be an appetite for some of those more progressive issues, even if running as a Democrat is usually you're dead in the water if you're running anywhere outside of a big city like St. Louis?
Yeah, I think people just they want to be able to decide. We've seen in previous elections that they want that ability to decide. I think in abortion was a big case where people wanted that. I think it's very similar in many cases where they don't want I think it's not so black and white on those issues, and they want the freedom to decide where they are.
So we're almost all the way through this very long, hot primary season, which I'm sure a lot of people within the Democratic Party are grateful is almost over. But we do have Wisconsin next week, and there's a very interesting primary, especially for governor on the Democratic side. There's a Democratic Socialist candidate, Francesca Hong, that's led in some of the polling. What do you see happening there?
That is probably the next most interesting race. I think people were waiting for Michigan to pass, and now all eyes on Wisconsin. And you're right, Hong does have a pretty big lead, doing a lot of media. You're seeing her everywhere suddenly, and I think a lot of people will be looking to that race. I think, pivoting off of Michigan, the Michigan race was obviously much closer as we discussed, but people will be looking to see, can the DSA prevail here, and what does that mean going forward? And both sides will continue, Susan, to make this case that, I think the left will say, and the DSA will say, look, we're able to win in these key states. They'll say it's not just about New York and Colorado. It's elsewhere. It's in a key state like Wisconsin. And I think that will give them more ammunition going forward.
You've done a lot of reporting on the state of the DNC, which, is not good. The DNC has been a mess for a while, but this definitely seems to be a new level of dysfunction. You've got a lot of recriminations over 2024. A lot of people are dissatisfied with Ken Martin's leadership, and certainly the party's finances are in the toilet. How much of a factor is this for Democrats in November? Will this hurt them in terms of trying to flip the House and the Senate? Is this going to carry over into 2028 as well?
Well, people keep saying, oh, it's a very Washington story. People don't really, everyday Americans don't really care about what the DNC is doing. But I do think that it's kind of symbolic of what is happening within the Democratic Party. This whole storyline this week of a missing chapter in the autopsy just added to the drama of what's going on inside the DNC. And it kind of, I think is very emblematic of the issues of in the party. I think fundraising is still, Ken Martin wants to say he's raised a lot of money, but they are still in the tank in a lot of ways. Compared to Republicans, they have a lot of work to do, and I think it's not helpful when you have one really strong national committee on the Republican side, and the DNC is still trying to figure things out, and a lot of finger pointing at Martin. A lot of people want him to resign. I don't think he will resign because that would lead to even more chaos within the party. But some people have been in my ear, like maybe he should bring on a second person to help. And so I'm curious to see if that happens, if that is how the DNC kind of turns the page and appeases a lot of Democrats right now who are really, really upset with how things are going.
So you of course covered Hillary Clinton's campaign. You wrote Shattered, about her failed bid for the presidency. Really, for Democrats, is it still 2016 in a lot of ways? Have they just never been able to get past those fights?
It's 2016 and then some, Susan. I think that there's very much this infighting that was playing out. Bernie Sanders was sort of at the start of that fight that never really died within the party. It's only gotten worse or better, but I think better for some, worse for some. I think that the party will continue to, as I mentioned earlier, have these sorts of fights and figure out, it really is sort of like they're trying to really, really home in on who they are and their identity. And I think that still, it remains to be seen where the party is going. But in a lot of ways, people are looking at the 2028 race as sort of a fresh start. There is no heir apparent. here. There is no nominee who's, leading the pack. I think that you've seen Gavin Newsom sort of winning at one time early on, and now you're seeing more of a thirst for someone else. Ossoff is gaining in a lot of polling. A lot of people think if he wins his race in November, he's got it made toward cruising toward a nomination. But the internal fight is still playing out. So I wonder, can a Bashir or an Ossoff get past the primary? I think that's the biggest question. Or will Democrats be looking for someone like an AOC or a Ro Khanna or someone that's further to the left to be their standard bearer? And that really remains to be seen.
One thing that I have noticed, especially this cycle, is the rise of kind of the influencer primary for Democrats. And, it's getting on all the right podcasts and the right Substacks and, your influencers on TikTok. And of course, we had with the California governor's primary, Tom Steyer was caught paying a bunch of people. I'm sure he's not alone in that. Do you see that being an even bigger factor as we're heading into 2028?
Yes, I mean, I think that was one of the big lessons from 2024. I think Kamala Harris was trying to kind of fly that plane and figure out, how to tap into influencers and Substacks. And, there was this great debate about how to go on Joe Rogan's show, which we had in our book fight. And the stakes were, what they tried to do to get on that show. And then in the end, it didn't really, happen. But I think they're learning a lot of lessons about, how to move past traditional media. I think it's always been a problem I think Republicans have been better at it. Donald Trump was a more nimble candidate and was able to do these things without, a committee deciding them. He wanted to do something, he would call and get on a show or get on a podcast. And I think Democrats are really, really moving toward that and trying to figure out. The thing is, you can't run the playbook from 2024. Things are constantly evolving. AI is going to be a huge factor in 2028. I think both sides are trying to figure out how to work with that. And I think that Democrats just need to work on their evolution. They are constantly trying to run the last race and win the last war. And I think that has always haunted them a bit.
Right. And, we've seen that Democrats have nominated two women, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, in 2016 and 2024, respectively. Both of them lost their races to Donald Trump. Do you see that there is somewhat of a backlash in the Democratic Party against Democratic candidates, certainly for president, but perhaps even this cycle? Because the biggest names out there that have attracted all the light and heat online have been men. First, it was Graham Plattner running for Maine Senate, then Abdul El-Sayed here in Michigan. There definitely seems to be like an energy, like we need guys who can lift and take on the manosphere. Are you seeing that play out at all?
In a big way. The first call I got the morning after 2024, the election in 2024, was from a top strategist in the party who said, we can't do this again. We can't nominate a woman. And I think that has played out. You have not really seen, I have not heard from a lot of people discount Kamala Harris right away. I mean, she's still trying to run for president, I think, in a lot of ways. She's been on this months-long book tour. She has been around the country. She has sold out venues. She's really trying to and listening to people and trying to make the case, I think, for why she can run again. But there is not an appetite for her specifically and for another woman. I don't hear talk of women running. I think people want to almost play it safe in a lot of ways. And they think that the right way to get back on the horse is to have someone who can appeal to everyone. And for whatever reason, sadly, I think women we're not going to see another woman candidate for maybe another cycle or two. I mean, we'll see candidates, but I don't think we'll see a nominee, rather.
Well, you've been covering the shakeup in the primary calendar going into 2028 for Democrats. How do you see that affecting who might have a leg up? Because certainly we know that Gavin Newsom and others are already circling.
Yeah, and they have been, but there are other. I think the big question right now is what the party desires, as we've talked a lot about. Do they want someone? Are they looking to a Jon Ossoff, an Andy Bashir, because they can win a general election? But also, as I mentioned, can they get past? Can these two get past a primary? I think for whatever reason, Ossoff seems to not repel the left as much from what I'm hearing from my sources. I think he's someone who can appeal to both sides of the party. But there are other questions. I think Gavin Newsom obviously has he has fundraising, a huge fundraising benefit. He has his name ID. He's been out there fighting. And so, but is there an appetite for someone like him or an AOC? And I think Newsom's struggles are going to be that people think he's a bit phony. I think that is probably his biggest struggle to this point. But, in California, he's angered a lot of progressives. Is that going to haunt him going forward in the primary? And I think for the other candidate or would-be candidates, I think they have to prove that they are fighters. You're seeing that in someone like Andy Bashir lately. He's gone after Mitch McConnell. I think he's trying to prove to the Democratic base that he does have that fighter in him, even though he has been governor of a red state and is really popular, knows how to work within those confines. But I think you're going to first have to win the base. Obviously, you're going to have to convince them that you're the right person. But most importantly, Democrats just want to win. They are still so upset about how 2024 played out. And I think you're going to see more moderates make the case that they can't win with a candidate like AOC. They have to have someone who can appeal to a broader electorate. The whole thing is the primary, though. Who can get past the Democratic base, who the party wants? I think South Carolina is going to obviously give the right candidate a lot of momentum. Certainly Black women were key to Joe Biden's victory in 2020 and Kamala Harris in 2024. Who will they select in 2028? Big question.
Do you see progressives coalescing around a certain candidate? And would that be AOC, or would they also be looking for someone who is not a woman?
Yeah, I have a story out today about AOC's relationship with the DSA, because she aligns with the DSA, but there are people who think that she, as one source told me, is a normie liberal, but not really DSA. So
they withdrew their endorsement from her a couple of years ago.
Yeah, they did. And so how does that play out in 2028? Will they still get behind her, or are they going to be more aligned with someone who really supports their platform of abolishing the Senate and eventually prisons? And these are not things you're hearing out of AOC's mouth. So how does that play itself out? I think that's a big question going forward. She obviously does have a huge fundraising leg up, if you will, over a lot of other candidates. I think she can go out there and talk to large crowds, as she's done with Bernie Sanders. And a lot of people suspect that she could win a primary if she were to run for president. She's still considering, obviously, running for Senate. I think that's very much in play. But if she does, a lot of people are telling me this is her moment. This is a moment where the left is having a moment. It's very strong, and they could very easily get behind her and support her going in. And shortly thereafter, after South Carolina, you have Nevada, and that would play very well for her.
Absolutely.
So I do think that I can see a world in which she wins a primary. But the larger question is, if she does win a primary, can she prove that she can win a general election? And can she sway voters who obviously want to win this race more than anything? Can she convince them that she can do it? So far, it's hers to lose. And, people obviously say she inherits the Bernie lane. Bernie people have been telling me she has her own lane. She's very much her own person. She doesn't have to inherit anyone's voters. And I think that's a very interesting takeaway.
Amy, I hope that we can continue to talk with you as we get further into this election cycle, because you're on the ground and you know what's going on within the Democratic Party better than so many other people. Can you tell us the best way that we can find your work?
Sure. You can read me on the Hill's website. I have a podcast that I've started on Tuesdays where I talk about the things that I'm writing about and hearing. And I'm also working on 2 books. I'm working on a book about AOC, and you can read an election book in right after 2028.
Oh, excellent. Well, we will be on the lookout for that. And thank you again for taking time on such a busy morning.
Thanks, Susan, and sorry about the technical difficulties.
No problem. Thank you.